Picture two people, same age, same weight on the scale, same job, same amount of walking every day. Both of them get an X-ray of their knee on the same afternoon. And the two X-rays look almost identical, same amount of wear, same narrowing of the joint space, same small spur on the edge of the bone. Put the two scans side by side and a radiologist couldn't tell you which one belongs to which person. But one of them plays football with their grandkids on a Saturday without thinking twice. The other one can't get down the stairs without wincing, skips the football entirely, and by evening they're reaching for painkillers just to sit comfortably on the sofa. One of them forgets they even have a knee problem by Tuesday. The other one plans their whole week around it. Same joint, same scan, completely different amount of pain. Here's the question nobody really answers for you. If the damage is the same, why does it hurt so much more for one person than the other? Is one of them just being dramatic? Is the other one just tougher? Neither. And that's actually the whole point of this video. Now, before we go any further, let me be completely clear about something because I don't want this getting twisted in the comments. This is not going to be a video telling you that your pain is all in your head. It isn't. Your pain is real, it's measurable, it shows up on functional MRI scans of the brain, and there is a genuine biological reason it's louder in your body than in someone else's. What I'm going to do in the next few minutes is show you exactly what that reason is, step by step in plain English, because once you actually understand the mechanism, you have something you didn't have 5 minutes ago, some real control over it. So today we're covering 5 things. First, why pain and joint damage are not the same conversation, and why your scan report can genuinely lie to you about how bad things really are. Second, the actual switch inside your nervous system that turns pain up or down, and why that switch matters more than the state of your cartilage. Third, why two people with identical joints can end up with wildly different pain levels, and what's really driving that gap. Fourth, a couple of other quiet factors that push that switch without you noticing. And finally, what you can actually do about it, backed by real published trials, not vague wellness advice. If you're new here, welcome. I break down what's actually happening inside your body. No fluff, no fear-mongering, just what the evidence actually says, explained the way I wish someone had explained it to me. If that's useful to you, a subscribe helps more than you'd think, and it costs nothing. Let's get into it. 1. Pain and damage are not the same thing. Here's something most people never get told in a 10-minute GP appointment. The amount of damage on your scan and the amount of pain you feel are only loosely related. Researchers have looked at this over and over in study after study across different populations, and the pattern keeps repeating. Scan a large group of people with absolutely no knee pain at all, people who would tell you their joints feel completely fine, and a huge number of them will already show wear and tear on the imaging. Some studies put that figure at roughly a third of pain-free adults over 40 showing meaningful osteoarthritis changes on their scan. Meanwhile, plenty of people with genuinely miserable daily, life-limiting pain will have scans that look almost unremarkable, sometimes barely different from someone half their age. Doctors even have a name for this mismatch. They call it the pain-pathology gap, and it isn't rare. It's actually closer to the rule than the exception. Think about how strange that is for a second. If joint damage caused pain in a simple one-to-one way, like a scratch on a car causing a dent you can see, then the worst scans should always belong to the people in the worst pain. They don't. Not even close. So the scan tells you what your joint looks like on that particular day. It does not tell you how loud your nervous system is going to make that damage feel, and it definitely doesn't tell you how that pain is going to affect your actual life. And that gap, the space between what's on the picture and what you actually feel walking up the stairs, is where this entire video lives. That gap is not random. It's not bad luck. It is being actively controlled by something happening elsewhere in your body, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack next. 2. The real switch. Pain sensitivity, not joint damage. Your nervous system has something like a volume dial for pain, and I mean that almost literally, not just as a metaphor. In a healthy joint, that dial sits low. A bit of wear and tear, a bit of extra load after a long walk sends a quiet, occasional signal up to your brain, something like, hey, go easy today, and that's genuinely it. The signal does its job and then it fades. But in a joint that's been sitting in low-grade inflammation for months or years, that dial gets turned up, sometimes quite dramatically. The nerve endings around the joint physically become more sensitive to stimulation. Doctors call this peripheral sensitization, and it doesn't stop there. Stay in that state long enough, and the spinal cord and brain themselves start amplifying the signal too, something called central sensitization. That's a genuinely different, more stubborn kind of pain, and it's one of the reasons some people's pain doesn't fully settle even after their joint damage has stabilized. The result of all this is that a completely ordinary amount of damage, the kind that would barely register in a healthy nervous system, starts producing pain signals far louder than it should. You're not imagining it, and you're not weak for feeling it more than someone else does. Your nerves are, quite literally, shouting more loudly than they used to for the exact same amount of provocation. Two identical scans, two very different volumes. And the thing that turns that dial up more than almost anything else we can actually influence day to day is chronic, low-grade inflammation circulating in your blood. Not the sharp, useful inflammation from a cut healing. The quiet, background kind that never really switches off. So the obvious next question is, where does that background inflammation actually come from? For most people, more than they realize, the answer is sitting around their middle. 3. Why some people's dial is turned up higher: the visceral fat connection. This is the part that actually explains the difference between your two identical X-rays from the start of this video. We used to think of body fat as passive padding, just storage, sitting there doing nothing except taking up space. That's wrong, and it's been wrong for a while now, even though a lot of that outdated thinking still floats around. Visceral fat specifically, the fat packed deep around your organs rather than the fat you can pinch under your skin on your arms or thighs, behaves like an active gland. It has its own blood supply, its own cellular activity, and it releases inflammatory signals directly into your bloodstream, the same chemical messengers your body normally uses when it's fighting off an infection. Except in this case, there's no infection to fight. Those messengers just keep leaking out quietly, constantly, in the background, sometimes for years or decades without you ever knowing it's happening. Your knee doesn't know where that signal came from. It has no idea whether it's coming from a genuine injury or from fat tissue sitting nowhere near the joint. It just receives the signal and responds to it. And the more of that signal is circulating through your blood, the higher your nervous system turns the pain dial we just talked about, completely regardless of what your X-ray actually looks like. That's also why people with more visceral fat tend to get joint pain even in places that carry absolutely no weight at all, like the hands and the fingers. Your hands don't bear your body weight when you're walking up the stairs or standing at the sink. So if pain shows up there too, and for a lot of people it does, that tells you something genuinely important. This was never purely about load and mechanics in the first place. It's about chemistry circulating through your entire body, reaching every joint you have, not just the weight-bearing ones. Sleep debt and chronic stress do something remarkably similar, and this is the part people almost always underestimate. Poor sleep, even just a handful of bad nights in a row, raises many of the same inflammatory markers as visceral fat does. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated in a way that sounds like it should calm inflammation down, since cortisol is technically an anti-inflammatory hormone, but when it's elevated constantly rather than in short, useful bursts, your tissues actually become resistant to it and inflammation creeps up instead of down. So you can end up with someone who is overweight, underslept, and stressed at work, who has a genuinely quieter, cleaner-looking scan than somebody else, and still hurts more day to day purely because their volume dial is sitting much, much higher. 4. The quiet factors that push the dial without you noticing. Before we get to what actually helps, it's worth naming a few other things that turn that volume dial up, because none of them show up on an X-ray either, and people rarely connect them to their joints at all. Genetics play a real role here, and I want to be upfront about that rather than pretending diet and lifestyle explain everything. Some people are simply born with nervous systems that run a bit hotter, more reactive pain processing, and that's not something anyone chose or caused. Old injuries matter too. A knee that was badly sprained 20 years ago can carry a slightly more sensitized set of nerves around it for the rest of your life, even after the original injury has completely healed on paper. And mood genuinely matters, not in a dismissive, just think positive way, but because anxiety and low mood physically change how the brain processes incoming pain signals, generally turning the volume up rather than down. None of that means the visceral fat and inflammation story is wrong. It just means you're not working with a single dial, you're working with several dials that all feed into the same final volume. The encouraging part is that most of them, unlike genetics and old injuries, are ones you can actually turn down yourself. 5. What actually turns the dial back down, and the evidence behind it. Here's the encouraging part. That dial isn't fixed in place. It moves in both directions, and it moves for adults at every age, not just for people who catch the problem early. A trial published in Arthritis Care and Research followed people with knee osteoarthritis through a structured weight loss and exercise program over several months. The group that lost the most weight didn't just move better and walk further without discomfort. Their pain scores dropped substantially more than would be explained by reduced mechanical load on the joint alone, and crucially, their inflammatory blood markers dropped alongside their pain scores, moving together, which is exactly what you'd expect if inflammation really is driving a meaningful chunk of the pain rather than just the extra weight pressing down on the joint. Sleep studies show something similar, but in reverse, which is honestly one of the more striking findings in this whole area. Restrict healthy people's sleep for even a handful of nights in a controlled lab setting, and their pain thresholds measurably drop, meaning everyday sensations that wouldn't normally register as painful start to feel genuinely uncomfortable. Give those same people their sleep back, and the threshold recovers within days. That's not a small effect either. Some of these studies show sleep-deprived participants becoming as sensitive to pain as people with a diagnosed chronic pain condition, purely from a few bad nights. Exercise itself, separate from any weight loss through it, also appears to directly lower circulating inflammatory markers over time, even in people who don't lose significant weight at all. Regular movement seems to have its own independent anti-inflammatory effect on the body, which is part of why doctors keep recommending it for joint pain, even to people who are already a healthy weight. And on the anti-inflammatory diet side, the evidence lines up closely with what I covered in an earlier video on food and joints on this channel. More fiber, more oily fish a couple of times a week, more extra virgin olive oil, and meaningfully less ultra-processed and refined carbohydrate intake consistently correlates with lower circulating inflammatory markers and lower reported pain in people already living with joint disease. It's not a dramatic overnight fix, but the pattern shows up again and again across different research groups and different countries, which is generally a good sign that something real is going on rather than a fluke result in one small study. None of this regrows cartilage. I want to be completely honest about that because I don't want to oversell anything here. But none of it needs to regrow cartilage to make a real difference to how you feel day to day. Because the pain you feel was never purely a cartilage problem in the first place, it was always partly a volume problem, and volume problems respond to exactly this kind of change. Here's the honest summary. Two people can have the same knee, the same scan, the same amount of damage down to the millimeter, and still end up with a completely different pain experience because pain was never just about the joint in the first place. It's about how loud your nervous system has been trained to shout, and that volume is being turned up or down every single day by your body fat, your sleep, your stress levels, and what's actually sitting on your plate. That reframes the whole question, doesn't it? Instead of just asking, how bad is my joint, a more useful question becomes, what's been turning my volume dial up lately? And that's a question you actually have some influence over day by day, week by week. If you're in pain right now, please get it properly assessed by a doctor first. This video isn't a diagnosis and it was never meant to replace one. If something feels sudden, severe, or you're generally unwell alongside it, please go and get seen properly rather than waiting it out. But once the serious stuff has genuinely been ruled out, know that you do have real, meaningful influence over how much that pain dial is turned up, even when the joint itself, on paper, looks exactly the same as it did last year. I know I covered a lot of ground in this one: mechanisms, fat tissue, sleep, stress, a fair bit of research, so let me know in the comments if there's a part of this you want me to go deeper on in a future video. And if this helped you understand your own pain a little better today than you did 10 minutes ago, a subscribe genuinely goes a long way for this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.